Welcome to Collegial Conversations with Diana Clark, the professional webinar series that offers clinical and personal perspectives on issues that are common, but often not talked about. Here is today's Collegial Conversation.
Thank you for joining a Collegial Conversation with Diana Clark. Today, our guest is Mike Langlois. Mike has been a psychotherapist for over 25 years to adults, children, and adolescents. Mike Langlois wears many hats, from clinical social worker to public speaker to corporate consultant for Fortune 500 companies and also nonprofits. Today, Mike is joining Diana to discuss video gaming, psychotherapy, and the impact social networks can have on relationships. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mike. I will now pass the conversation over to Diana.
Thank you, Laura. And welcome, Mike. I haven't seen you in quite a number of years, and you actually are the first person who alleviated my concern as a mother of a 10-year-old boy, who is now 20, by the way, when he was video gaming, and you said, basically, it can be functional. And so I was opening my eyes to see the ways it could be functional. Can you tell more about that?
Sure. Well, and it's nice to see you too again, Dana. Boy, time flies. 20. That's amazing. So it can be functional in a lot of ways. And what I think, I kind of want to back the conversation up for a second. Think about it in terms of what we're talking about. We're talking about video games, which are media and an art form. And so in some ways, because it's a new technology or a relatively new technology, that's why we ask these questions. In a few decades, when you and I are perhaps gone, these questions won't be asked, because it's the equivalent of asking, is reading functional? Is cinema functional? Is art functional? And now, of course, with retrospect of hundreds of years, for some of these art forms, we're like, of course they are. What a silly question. But here we are with video games as a relatively new art form in media. And so we are asking that question. So let's answer it. And one of the quickest ways of answering it, I would say, is video games are functional and can increase functioning because they can increase or bring about what we call flow states. So many people in psychology are familiar with the positive psychology, Csikszentmihalyi, who talked about flow states and how flow states have several things in common with them. So, and a lot of times you can think about flow states as when you're rock climbing or walking on coals or some of these really intense high ticket items. And what they do is they give you intense and focused concentration in the present, something mindfulness is always trying to get us to do. Flow states have a merging of action and awareness. You're only focused on what you're doing and you're only aware of what you're doing while you're doing it. And for some of us neurotics, one of the nicest parts of flow states is they help us lose momentarily our reflective self-consciousness. So like when we hit 20, and when we hit our late teens and early 20s and the parietal lobe finally kicks in, suddenly we're like, oh, I'm thinking. I'm thinking about my thinking. I can think about my thinking. Let me tell you what I'm thinking. I can't stop thinking about the fact that I'm thinking about things. And that reflective self-consciousness can kind of go away when we're immersed in a flow experience. Flow experiences give us more of a sense of control and agency, which, boy, over the past couple of years, we all could use a little bit more of that. And then last but not least, flow experiences kind of distort our subjective experience of time. So, while you get in this zone where you're really enjoying something, or it seems like time is either standing still or going fast, all of those things are parts of what flow experience give us. And those functions help both give us an opportunity that some parts of our neurology, like the parietal lobe, can kind of take a break, and other parts can really come to the foreground.
Fascinating. So are there good video games that do flow and bad video games that don't do flow, or is that unique to the participant?
I think it really depends on the participant. So one of the things I've noticed, because almost all of the patients I work with play video games, they don't all play the same ones. And one of the hardest things, I'm a gamer myself. And so back when I started integrating video games, I thought, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to always be having fun playing video games. And don't get me wrong, I've got the best job on the planet. However, some of my patients like to play games that I either am not really good at, or I'm not really interested in. So it really, but they're fascinated with them. So for example, in general, first person shooters, I'm not a huge fan of, not because of the violence, just because I tend to enjoy more immersive role play games that are more fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons, escapism. And each of these games provide a different sort of function or experience for people. So for me, I want to get less focus when I'm not working. I want to kind of, just roam a wonderful fantasy world. Whereas sometimes folks really want to be able to experience themselves as powerful and focused and making gains and achievements and part of a team that is taking over something in a first-person shooter world. So it really ranges. And so it comes back, again, it comes back to the age-old therapy piece of we meet the patient or the client where they're at. Whether I like a particular game or not isn't meaningful except for this one thing, and then I'll sort of stop. I notice that I don't like games that I'm not good at or that I experience myself as clumsy at. And it occurred to me when I started that this is exactly how some of our patients feel every single moment of their life, right?
Yeah.
They're like failing at, or they feel like they're failing at school, at work, or any number of things. And a lot of us have kind of learned how to kind of quickly identify what we're good at and silo down in it for the rest of our lives. So I actually encourage parents and therapists to try to play games, even if they feel clumsy or not good at them, because if you pay attention to those feelings, you'll notice, boy, yeah, these are things I'd want to avoid. These are things that I fight about or make me angry. Gee, it gives me more empathy into my patient's state.
Interesting. It's a confession, I've never played a video game. I've played solitaire on the computer, but that's about it. But I do have to confess that I walked into my son's room and he was playing, and I don't know the name of it, I should, but I got transfixed by the art. And the art and the music itself was immersive. I got it. I didn't know the plot or the goal or the techniques to play the game, but I got that they were vehicles of both music and art.
Well, I'm so glad you actually brought up both the things you just did, because first off, I'm going to say you are a gamer. We tend to think of games as things that like Call of Duty or something like that, but everyone plays video games. Right now, I don't know who's not posting Wordle on their Facebook feed. Any game that has digital content that involves that sort of immersion. And think about it, I don't know if you've played Wordle, but when I get to guess 3, it's like, oh, this is getting real. This is intense. What if I don't get it? And it's just this little moment, but it's a flow
My sister was playing it yesterday in my presence. I said, what are you doing? She said, I'm playing Wordle.
Yeah, it's a wonderful, simple game. And solitaire too, any kind of play state that you're using video game sort of technology for counts. And the reason I mention that is because we tend to focus on gaming as something other than what we do, when in fact, I'm sure you've had the experience when you're doing solitaire of you forget about whatever else maybe is on your mind. Right?
Love that. I do get into a zone when I play solitaire.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of games. They get us into a zone. And the nice thing about what you said about looking at the art is that's one of the more positive examples of what I call the over-the-shoulder experience parents tend to have, which is different. Even it's close, but it's different. And so that no matter what you do when you're looking over the shoulder of your kiddo, or you're a young adult, you're not actually experiencing the game in its immersiveness. And a lot of times, what parents and therapists experience is not that the patient is immersed in something rich, but more that they're competing for attention with a piece of glass. That it's like, and I think that's the piece that parents and therapists should, truth be told, we got into our job on some level because the idea of someone being trapped in a room focusing on us but being invisible is appealing to us, that we both really want you to pay attention. So you're in my room and there's no one else here, but we want to talk about you, so that you don't really pay attention to me. But where that gets kind of aggravated is when somebody is gaming or either looking at their phone or something like that, and the other can get irritated. It's like, what are you doing? Why aren't you paying attention to me?
Yeah. Yes, I've had that experience. 100%. Yeah. So you do actually engage in games with your clients. Do you do that in the office? Do you do that remotely? I'm just curious about the logistics of how you do that.
Sure. So I used to, when I was working more in face-to-face therapy, I had an Xbox 360, which tells you which will date me to any gamers in the audience. And prior to COVID, I'd gone 100%, 85% virtual. So now I am almost entirely, I'm entirely virtual. And what I do is when a patient starts with me, I have them sign a limited HIPAA waiver. And for those of you who are kind of policy wonks, why this is important is because no gaming platform was ever designed to convey medical information or that level of encryption or privacy. So what I do is ask the patient and the parent if they're willing to waive their HIPAA rights limited to, using Steam or video games. And parents are usually fine with that, as well as kids. And then what we do is we just use regular video game platforms. And I'll Zoom simultaneously. Now, what I do ask the patient to do is, while we're gaming, to please, mute whatever in-game voice chat there is, so that we can actually be talking if we're talking, and it not be, privy to everybody. So we usually spend about a half an hour gaming, probably 5 to 10 minutes are getting set up. And, if you're someone that's, getting your toe dipping in the water with playing video games online, I want to make sure you know that 10 minutes getting set up or figuring it out, please don't get down on yourself for it. There's all sorts of technical problems that come up with trying to integrate video games and therapy. That's part of the work. Try to think of it as, getting the frame set. Just like you welcome a patient into your waiting room and then your office, you explain your policies. Sometimes there's a little wait because something ran late. The gaming thing is just another iteration of that. And it's actually a good opportunity for our patients to see us when things don't quite go according to plan.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So your patients then have an opportunity to see you, probably not just in a connecting way, and I want to get to connection in a few minutes, but as a human, maybe more than they would if you were just Zooming with them.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, one of my favorite stories is a patient that I saw several years ago who really connected with me around the fact that I really stunk at Call of Duty. And they were like trashing me at Call of Duty and just, getting out all their early aggression and low self-esteem. It was getting projected on me because this is, of course, how they felt at school. And I just kind of absorbed it. And I was like, yeah, I'm really bad, but I'm going to keep trying. And then they kind of made a deal with me that I would practice a little between sessions. And I said, sure, but that's exactly why homework is important. So why don't you do some homework? And they were like, oh, fine. And what happened is, over the course of time, the aggression and berating my poor performance kind of fizzled out. It got kind of boring for them. And so what they started to do was encourage me and give me tips. And think about how rare it is for a patient to be able to have that wonderful opportunity to encourage a therapist, or see a therapist as not this all-knowing, wise expert, but some fumbling human being who they can actually help.
Yeah, I agree. I like that. And it's without self-disclosure of a personal way. It is just being human in their presence
Exactly.
and sucking
Exactly.
sometimes. Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I raised a son, as I have said, in Vermont. And we all live on many acres, and there isn't a whole lot of neighborhood, and there wasn't a lot of, can't walk out, play with the next door neighbor. That wasn't what he is. And his main way of connecting with peers was through video gaming. And that seemed like a positive to me for somebody who could potentially be living in isolation, just like kids are now.
Mhm. I think you're absolutely right. And I know I started to talk about flow states, but that's only one way gaming is functional. And I think probably you're hitting on one of the other most important pieces of it, which is it's connection. Those of us that grew up in the 70s and 80s, I'm not going to name names, but I'm definitely one of those people. Our experience of video games was Pong, where it was you watching a television set. And it can really kind of give people, that can be what we assume games are now. But video games now have text chat and video chat and audio chat. And young people are doing homework and homework groups while they're playing Call of Duty. And they're talking with each other even when there's a really bad storm out because they can use their computer. And I do want to mention one thing about TikTok, which is sort of tangentially related because I do stream, and one of the things I also do is some TikTok videos, and I do some live TikToks. And I remember very powerfully about 6 months ago that I was doing a live, and a 12-year-old boy came on my chat who I'd never met. And I make it really clear I don't do therapy on TikTok, but they said, I need some advice. I'm going to court. And I was like, why are you going to court? And he said, well, because when COVID happened, I stopped going to school online because I hated online. And they put me in on a chins. And so I actually talked to them about the process of how, no, you're not going to jail. They're probably going to ask you what's going on. And here's what I would encourage you to do. Say you want a school staff member identified that you can connect with. Say that you want help getting set up online so you know how to use it, and ask for some help. And also point out to them that you were a straight A student prior to COVID. And, in the course of this conversation, I became aware that this kid was all by himself in sort of the rural Midwest and really worried he was going to jail, and had just seen a few videos of me, thought, gee, this guy seems like a decent therapist and human being. I'm going to, ask him a question. He actually was able to go and advocate for himself. And so all of that connection happens through TikTok. And people need to know about that, because I think people think TikTok is just about dancing or just about kind of videos that are funny. And that's a huge part of it. But TikTok and video games and Twitch and Discord and all those other things are ways we're connecting. And some people really only have those sorts of avenues of connection.
That's right. So I'm going to ask the mom question. When should parents be concerned about the hours of video gaming?
Okay, so that's a really hard one. I would basically try to break it down and always try to encourage parents to think about it as, don't think about it as the video game or the substance. Use the Charles Dickens rule of thumb. Okay, if your kid was in their room reading Charles Dickens' Bleak House for 2 hours, would you be worried? If they were reading Charles Dickens 8 hours in a row, would you be worried? If it's any particular activity, then you can start to ask about it. Or substitute it for something else, which is, okay, if your kiddo was coming home right from after school and doing yoga in their room for 3 hours, would you have a problem with that? Once you've kind of loosened the value judgment around video games, then start to think about what are you really after? Are you worried that they're not doing well in school? Are you worried that they're not talking with you or connecting with you? Are you worried that they're isolated? Don't focus on the video game, because that's usually the low-hanging fruit, and it also masks whatever's really going on. Is it time management? So I think that, a lot of people want a hard and fast answer about how many hours is okay. And I tell them, you're not going to like my answer. No one will like it, because the only study we've ever done on gaming and stress was done in Afghanistan with folks that were active duty armed services personnel. So not a great population to sort of norm for adolescents. But what they found was up to 4 hours a day of video games was one of the top 2 ways to reduce stress. It was actually tied with physical exercise. After 4 hours, it started to become a stressor. And so if you really want a number, and I'm telling you, you don't want to hear this, up to 4 hours is the only amount that research has shown is, a stress reducer. I don't think we're ever going to see the answer to this, because I don't think any internal review board is ever ethically going to say, hey, let's hook adolescents or kids up to video games for 12 hours and see what happens. Right. So try not to focus on the time part too much, because I think it's really kind of a red herring.
That's great.
The other thing I would say is also try to separate out what's a video game and what's parental interruption. So for example, parents like to do things in half-hour segments or hour segments, and mental health providers for years have given countdowns, whether it be 3, 2, 1 or 5-minute warnings. These work horrible with video games. And in fact, I encourage parents to kind of think about, if your kid was playing intramural soccer, and they were in the middle of a game, you wouldn't run out onto the field and say, okay, you've got 15 minutes, then it's time for dinner. But we do this with our kids all the time. We tell them, look, family values of being loyal, finishing a job when it's done, showing up for your friends, being responsible, those are important. And then they're in the middle of a game with a team, and we come in and say, you've got 5 minutes. What you need to do is get to know the game and start to organize limits around rounds or matches or platoons, figure out how long does the thing of Fortnite last. Okay, then you can calculate, okay, if I want them done in an hour, that's three rounds of Fortnite, and we're going to give or take. Then you have to understand it's going to give or take a few minutes. But stop trying to kind of apply these minute values, because what happens is when parents come in and interrupt a task, cognitively, what happens is you can lose your focus for about 30 minutes. It can actually disrupt your kind of cognitive planning. So every time you go in and ask your kiddo, hey, are you doing your homework? God help you if they were doing their homework, because you've just kind of discombobulated them. So some of this is to sort of understand that if a kid starts to get angry or has an outburst, it's not because of the video game, it's because you interrupted them. They're little beings with their own psychology, and you kind of poking your head into their world, disrupting things. That's what caused the disruption, not Call of Duty.
Good for you. I can see why your population of kids, young adults, even adults with a youthful flair would find you very helpful. So thank you for joining us. Believe it or not, we are out of time, unless you have one more piece of advice you would like to offer families. What I would like to offer families for advice is, please remain calm and try to play one of the games your child is playing with them. Try to engage in their world. Even if they say they don't want you to, try to download it or look at it yourself and see what all the excitement's about. Because it's not a substance. This isn't about sharing a drug with someone. This is about learning what makes a flow state so powerful for somebody and trying to join with them. Love it. Thank you again. You have spent a half an hour with Diana Clark and Michael Langlois. I've always said it wrong. I hope if you've enjoyed this, you will like it on your YouTube station and share it around.
Thank you for joining this webinar. Tune in to more webinars and sign up for our newsletter at o'connorpg.com.